Am I hosting or are you hosting? Welcome, everyone. Today is Wednesday, the 14th of January, 2026, and this is the SIG Cloud Provider office hours. SIG Cloud Provider is a sub-project of Kubernetes SIGs, and as such, we follow their meeting guidelines, which can basically be summarized as please treat everyone as you would expect to be treated, or explicitly so please be kind to each other. And if you have a question, please raise your hand, and I will call on you. So, at the beginning of our meetings, we like to go through the sub-projects and see if there's any updates, although I see there's just a few of us here today. So yeah, I don't know, Bin, did you want to go into your topic about the cloud provider GCP?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Michael. Hi, everyone. My name is Xuebin Zhang, and I'm an engineering manager at Google. It's very nice to meet everyone here. Yeah, today, one update I want to share is we are planning to allocate some more resources to invest in the improvements of cloud provider GCP repo. Not only to provide better support for JKE, but also to make when the use case that when users is to self-manage clusters on JCE, we want to improve that COG to make that better as well. So we have talked with Walter, and he has shared a lot of useful suggestions to us. At this point, we have a few things we want to do. For example, yeah, we want to resolve a few long-standing tech debts in the repo that remove the old Bazel build stack and transition to the better makefile build-based process, and also have some improvement to for the automatic release process. We don't have a very solid story right now. And also we are thinking potentially we plan to use COPS to standardize the cluster provision process in tests, and also aiming to add back some of the previously dropped test coverage. It looks like when we transition from K/K to the out-tree model, so some of test is kind of lost in the middle. Yeah, we want to add it back. So yeah, we are here. So if there anything you want us to take a look, a PR, an issue, some future directions, suggestions set by the SIG, yeah, please don't hesitate to reach out. Yeah, thanks.
So I don't know if you already mentioned this, Shubin, but I think the other thing that Shubin is hoping to come in and help with, which is his team are experts on some of the finer grained, which is the right CSI driver, how can we get the right load balancers automatically set up? A lot of that stuff that I think we'd very much like them to step up and take care of for us.
Yeah. So, yeah, feature-wise, yeah, we also have some experts in the team working on storage area and also the networking area, right? So yeah, we also want to make sure to cover the gaps. Yeah, thanks, Walter, for mentioning that.
Yeah, thank you, Shubin and Walter. Like it's really exciting. I'm like excited to hear about Google putting some more resources into this, and I think yeah, it sounds like the direction you're going is great to start with. I don't have any specific requests at the moment, but we've been trying to improve the communication between kind of the SIG and the individual communities that maintain the cloud controllers. And so, yeah, like I'm happy to see it, and I imagine that we'll just continue the communication and kind of work towards a brighter future for everyone, right?
Yeah.
Awesome, very cool. All right, does anybody else have questions or comments for Shubin or for Walter or anyone? Okay. Then we'll move on to the next agenda topic. Actually, I realize I'm not sharing either. I probably should do that. Share my screen here. Apologies. Okay.
Oh, Google is showing up in force. Hey, Google.
Yeah, many Googlers here today. Welcome.
Good seeing you, Bowie.
Hey.
I'm still looking forward to seeing one of those, Google spinner hats some days. Walter keeps promising me he's gonna show it to me. I
gave
see,
mine away.
I see Walter has left the room now. Uh-oh. All right. While Walter is on his way back, I would like to share this enhancement that has come up recently. And this is related to a discussion that I know is a favorite topic of the SIG. And all right, Walter, like, yes, representing hardcore now. I love it. That makes me so happy. Um, so
I still know where to find it.
absolutely, that's amazing. I love it. That just made my whole week, basically. Uh, okay, so I wanted to bring up this enhancement that has come up in the last couple days here. Thank you to this user, Sergey Logvinov, I want to say, although please forgive me if I mispronounce that. So there's a topic that I know was very popular with us for a while. This goes back quite a while. The notion of the hybrid cloud support. And this is the idea of being able to have multiple CCMs in the same cluster so that you could have a cluster span across infrastructure providers. And this is a topic, we've had a very long discussion about this. And, I think Sergey has been involved, for a very long time. And so recently they decided to put up an enhancement about this. Now, the enhancement is not specifically about hybrid cloud, supporting hybrid cloud, but it's kind of like the first entry into it. And I think this is also based around another discussion that we had. And I want to see if we have the link here to it. Yeah. So is this the one? So we had another discussion that had been ongoing about, although this is like Joel's review of the enhancement. But we had another discussion recently about the notion of nodes being able to exclude themselves from the lifecycle controller. And this would be for cases where, for some reason or another, user has decided or the cloud has decided that a certain node should not be counted as part of the lifecycling. And so a user might say, this node is undergoing some sort of something or other. I would like to exclude it from the node lifecycling. Now, unfortunately, I can't find the issue where we were talking about this because we did have a long conversation about it. And I think there's a lot of agreement that we think it's going to be complicated to do. But Sergey has put up this enhancement for, I think, one way to display node ownership by a cloud, and then perhaps that would be the first entryway into, breaking the dam of then being allowing things to not be part of node lifecycling and whatnot. Since this discussion originally came up, I've kind of formed some very strong opinions about it, and I think this is going to be a really difficult problem to solve. Even just the notion of excluding a node from the life cycle check, which is what the core of this issue is about. So the reason I'm bringing it up here is I would like to encourage others to take a look at this PR and to leave their comments on the enhancement. And also, I was hoping to kind of promote some conversation here if anyone had thoughts about this or thoughts in general about the notions of either supporting hybrid cloud topologies or the notion of excluding nodes from the lifecycling check. Does anybody have comments about that or questions? Yeah, Walter, please.
So interestingly, I think there are other folks who need to be involved. When we start talking about excluding nodes that are being brought on board from being in the lifecycle check, the obvious, I don't think anything in this space is obvious. The obvious way to go about it would be with the taints and tolerations on the node. And that basically happens before we cloud provider, because it's what determines the CCM association, ever see the node, right? So, the first thing I'm going to say is I think a lot of this comes down to whatever your provisioning tool is, like COPS hybrid or something. I think there are other things that are going to be really important to understand that are also going to come in at the time of the provisioning. So as an example, another one of our components is the auth provider. And I mean, I'm not sure that it's quite the same, but depending on where the user wants to load their images from, they're going to need different auth providers. I mean, you could certainly see, like, sorry, picking on Bridget here. If Bridget and I, are sharing a customer, and so they're crossing the Google Azure boundary, and they've got work or images in GCRIO and the Azure registry, and you want to be able to load them from either. You now need different auth providers, and you may even have some interesting things, because I've never tried running the GCP auth provider outside of a Google node, and it's less than clear to me where it would be even loading. It may not even work quite the same way, right? Because if we're using the local service account on the VM that we're running on to pull the tokens that are needed to authenticate to the registry, then it'll work on the Google nodes, and it may not work on the Azure nodes to pull images from GCR.io, which, so either we may need to fix the auth provider, or, maybe there is more to this, including things like, where do the workloads run? When you have this hybrid cloud, do you want some intelligence to load the images intelligently based on, let's pull it from the local registry? Do I want to set the workloads to work in the? I think there are a lot of things here that we may want to think through. Long-winded way of saying I think there's a lot we want to think through about the usage.
I 100% agree with you, Walter. And I think that there's failure states that we don't currently have to handle for that would definitely come into play here, right? Like, what does the crash loop back off look like when the problem is we're trying to pull something that we have no ability to pull, but maybe the cluster thinks it should be able to, but it's like, no, you're trying to operate completely someplace where you don't have credentials. Like, I feel like the expecting the cluster to also understand it might have to deal with things it never had to deal with before. It's definitely, we have to think about, to your point about there are other SIGs. When you said others will need to be in this conversation, I wrote that down immediately, because I was like, oh, this is not just a SIG Cloud Provider discussion.
Yeah, I mean, and then pulling in yet another API. Bowie's here, so Bowie can maybe able to help a little bit on this one. But another interesting problem is, one of our native assumptions for most of Kubernetes clusters is that there's automatic routing within, that all traffic is routable within the cluster. And so, as an example, when we want to send traffic to a webhook, we sort of blindly throw it at a random node in the cluster, and then assume that the node in a node in the cluster will route it to the right place. And it's not clear to me that if I'm running a webhook in Azure and I throw the traffic from the Kube API server to a GCP node, then in fact we have that sort of seamless routing across the cluster that we expect. We have mechanisms to deal with them, but they're not really set up to deal with this scenario. And so there's probably some interesting configuration that we need to do when it comes to, both workload assignment, to make sure that maybe workloads that need to talk to each other are in the same cluster segment. And when we want to do traffic routing from the API server, that we're sending it to the right segment, which we don't really have anything set up to do that today. I don't know if Bowie has any thoughts about, maybe there's some magic we could do on the networking to actually make traffic between the networks, the network/cluster segments route seamlessly, but I don't think that it just works out of the box.
Like given arbitrary stuff, or
Well, I mean, I'm just thinking if I've got 10 nodes in GCP and 10 nodes in Azure, and I have traffic that lands on the GCP cluster but is meant to be going to an Azure, one of the some pod or the kubelet running in Azure.
There's no, you'd have to set it up yourself.
Right. This is what I'm saying.
Remember the work we did with respect to the webhooks on that like proxy stack. I forget what it's called.
Well, and there's the API server network proxy, but
yes,
it's not really designed like if
you run it's clever. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you run it as a daemon set, you could probably make this work because you can tell it to go to exactly the right node, but there isn't sort of a segment concept built into API server network proxy. We've talked about it building in failure zone, and we could probably map this to failure zone, but it's not obvious that it's just going to work. In fact, it seems obvious that it won't just work out of the box. Like you said, there's some configuration and setup that needs to be done.
I'm having difficulty finding my own raise hand, but I'm just gonna inject in here for a second because I think, Walter, you're making a great point. And even beyond what you're talking about, I'm thinking about like users who have set up a cluster where it's like, what if you have VPCs on both sides in both clouds? Let's say you have a cluster operating in two clouds, right? And you've got VPCs set up within both clouds so that you're trying to keep the traffic from exfiltrating without some sort of like credentialing system or whatever. And now the user sets up a workload that gets split across those clouds and they need to talk to each other. And it's like, yeah, how do you even begin to set up the tunnel between the two VPCs that now might be segregating traffic based on like credentials that are coming out of there? So yeah, like that's going to be really complicated. I think, Walter, you're kind of like touching on a can of worms here for me that goes even deeper than just like where you started. Because, I think you started close to the cloud controller. You're like, well, in addition to the cloud controller on GCP, you may also be running the image auth controller. And this is like, central to what's going on there. But I start to think about, okay, let's go to the next step, the cluster autoscaler. If we're now inventing some way for nodes to exclude themselves from node lifecycling checks, does the cluster autoscaler now need to be aware of some new label that exists? And now it needs to exclude those nodes from what it's doing because otherwise those nodes aren't necessarily in the cloud. It's like there's a whole series of knock-on effects that come from this. And it's like, I go back to something, Walter, you said, earlier in this conversation, which is like, maybe this could be like something more close to conditions and taints and those kind of things, as opposed to like a label that gets agreed upon, because that's, something like the cluster autoscaler is already looking for nodes that might have an unhealthy condition or an unhealthy taint and knows how to ignore them, right? Whereas it would have to be taught all this new behavior the other way. So I'm very concerned about how some of the direction this is going, but my hope here is to promote people to go take a look at that enhancement and kind of read it and leave your comments there, because I think there's, even just beyond the notion of like on one level, the hybrid cloud thing is one issue that's very complicated, and I think it's going to take a while to solve. But even this enhancement, which I think is just one piece of that larger story, attempts to get into the notion of how do we have a node broadcast that it is owned by a specific CCM, and how do the other CCMs then ignore that node, or how do you have a node opt out of those life cycling, checks and whatnot. Let me see, does anybody have a hand up? Because my display has gotten all messed up here. Looks like not. All right. Do other folks have thoughts or questions about this topic? Okay, well, thanks for the discussion there. I think it's great. Like, please take a chance if you have it to read the enhancement, in the next week or two. I think it'd be great to get some comments there. All right, next topic. Theo, you would like to talk about upstream ash testing. So please take it away and tell us what ash is. Is Theo here? Is Theo double muted right now? I don't think Theo's here, actually. Can anybody see him?
I don't see Theo. So maybe we need to put that one on next time.
Yes, I will put that in the bin for next time. I think Theo wanted to talk to us about, I think Ash is one of the AWS platforms. And I think Theo wanted to talk to us about testing, and it kind of goes into our larger story about testings too. So that'll be a fun topic for next time.
Just to correct that, it's Azure Stack Hub.
Azure Stack Hub. Thank you. I couldn't remember if it was which one it was.
Which I think is Azure ships you a server rack to plug in your own data center kind of thing.
Right, yeah. I always get it confused with the other one. But yeah, an interesting topic about, testing this one specific topology of Azure configuration.
Just for some context, I think this has come from, there was a regression in the Azure Cloud Provider because we updated some libraries. I think it was the Azure SDK to a version that's not compatible with Azure Stack Hub. So we were hoping to be able to add some testing that would prevent us from doing that again and catch those sort of things earlier. But I don't know what we have in terms of infrastructure to be able to do upstream Azure. So maybe some of our Microsoft colleagues can comment on that.
Yeah, Azure Stack Hub is kind of its own beast. I can definitely reach out to that team. Do we have a link to the specific issue or?
See if I can find it.
Because, yeah, it's definitely not AKS. I mean, it's definitely its own thing. As you mentioned, on-prem would imply that you have to implement a lot of things significantly differently. So.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, this is like we had been doing some testing inside Red Hat around the the Ash platform, and there's a similar platform for AWS that's kind of the same thing. Walter, I see you've got your hand up, please.
Yeah, so I mean, I know very little about the specifics here, but I think there is a broader framework question, which I think goes back to actually some of the stuff Shubin and Bowie were here to chat about, which is we want to be able to link together a cloud provider X repo to the central KK builds and determine whether or not a change to KK is good across cloud providers, right? I mean, this is, I think, one of the central things that we are looking at, and also not just is it okay with each of the cloud providers, but also, some features are not cloud provider specific, but the tests are, which is what you and I keep drumming on about Elmico. But I think fundamentally, this all comes down to, it would be good for us to have a framework which allows us to run tests from a cloud provider X repo and provide feedback. And so I love the topic. I love this. We should do this, but I think it comes back to this thing that we keep saying that we want, which is a way to trigger those build and test runs.
Yeah, I mean, Walter, totally 100% agree with you. I guess to the extent that I can, I've got a colleague who is, unable to attend these meetings currently, but hopefully in the future will. And we're trying to put together an example of how this framework would fit together. So right now he's been doing some work to develop, again, this goes back to what we've been talking about for the last couple of years, where we have a testing interface that exists in the KK repo, and then each cloud provider could implement that interface so that we could do kind of the testing here. And I think we're getting to the point where we're probably on the cusp of advancing that enhancement and bringing it back up in the community. I think my colleague's name is Milland. The work that Milland has been doing, he's getting very close to having an example of this where we could show how it would fit together. And I'm going to start going to the SIG testing meetings probably in maybe not the next one, but the one after it at the end of this month, because I'd like to start to get their advice about kind of the questions of how we expose these tests in the end, because it's going to be very much a two-part thing where I think there's a question I have now that now that Milland and I are getting deeper into the actual creation of these tests, we're starting to wonder should these end and this is maybe kind of an existential, yeah, I would love to link them up, Walter. Some of this gets into kind of an existential question about the future of what do we mean when we say extracting cloud provider stuff from KK, right? Because as Melinda and I get deeper and deeper into some of the tests that we're working on, one of the things that's becoming apparent to us is that maybe we want to actually move these end-to-end tests from living in the KK repo to living in the cloud provider staging repo, so that it looks more like we've got that cloud provider framework and the end-to-end tests live there with it. And then each concrete cloud provider links against those tests in the cloud provider framework to actually create the testing infrastructure that then can be run on whatever platform you want. So yeah, like I think it would be great to kind of link up about some of this stuff and especially talk about, how we can make it happen, especially if, Walter, I know you had engineers looking on, or there were engineers at Google looking into like how we start to make the underlying platform a little more variable, coming out of like, using cops or something else to get those nodes out there, right?
Well, also I will say, I mean, going back to it, the tests themselves are frequently cloud provider specific, right? So, I mean, the examples are, if I want to check Kublet's ability to remain healthy after I bounce the network, how I bounce the network is cloud provider specific. If I'm in the API machinery tests and I want to run the aggregator tests, the end-to-end aggregator tests, it turns out that the way that you set up and run the aggregator is actually cloud provider specific, including which images have been built for a given cloud provider. So I'm gonna leave it. I like the idea of trying to have the tests in the central place, but I will point out, even in the central place, you may still need a certain amount of per cloud provider pieces there.
Yeah. So like if that cloud provider framework, the one that's linked in the tests, not the one that's related to CCMs, but if that provider framework, that handle that gives you access to like the provider specific functionality, if that is used in the other tests as well, then yeah, it seems like we probably would have to centralize things back towards, because the notion would be that like, okay, the in the future, that provider interface has more of a queryable type of interface where you say, okay, does this provider implement like, the node stuff or whatever? Like, does it implement the ability to delete a node, right? And if it does, okay, we can run this test. And then likewise, in this scenario, it would be querying that provider. Like, does this provider have the ability to like delete a load balancer or something? Okay, then we can run that test or whatever. Otherwise, we skip the test. So I think we might probably need to bring it back in there, but I would love to see some of those tests too. So I've kind of made some notes here. I did notice that Theo joined us, but does anybody else have questions about kind of the Ash topic? Or I guess now that you're here, would you like to talk about the Ash topic? I think we kind of covered the basics of it. And if you're talking, Theo, you're still muted.
Hello. Sorry, I
Hey.
managed to double book myself and completely forget that I'd booked this.
No worries. We kind of covered the initial issue that you were talking about here and kind of shared what's going on. Although it looks like this is merged now. Did you want to talk about this a little more or anything?
I think the thing that I mainly wanted to bring up was is it feasible to have any sort of upstream testing? Because I think this is a pattern we've seen multiple times where we'll be doing a rebase and we might have code that's 2 or 3 months old that's merged upstream but hasn't been tested on Ash. So we're then going back upstream and saying, hey guys, this broke this. Which isn't the end of the world, but it can mean some slightly hairy, urgent reverts or bug fixing.
Right.
And I think, yeah, I just thought it would be great if there, even if there was a periodic or something that ran weekly. I know like Ash resources are kind of weird and we don't even have a ton of them here at Red Hat. But just to get that signal slightly earlier would be really
So
cool.
a couple of things about this one. So I'm not super familiar with this specific issue or the revert, I did take a quick look through it, and it looks like, and I linked in the comment there, that it looks like somebody was saying that they were kind of using this as a proxy and they weren't actually caring about testing Azure Stack Hub specifically, which is good because Azure Stack Hub is an on-prem appliance. And so we often can't test how a customer might be using it. But I'm curious if there's a specific thing that we're trying to use it to test, and we test that not indirectly. You know what I'm saying? Like, because Azure Stack Hub is so unique, it's not Azure Kubernetes service, and it's something customers use on-prem. Even if we're testing the Azure Stack Hub code base in general, that's not necessarily a good model for how customers might be using it. So I'm just kind of curious, like, should we be testing this particular test for this purpose, or approach it a different way? And if we should be testing Azure Stack Hub, exactly what information are we hoping to get? I guess it's two questions. Answer one or both.
Off the top of my head, I can see Amika's got his hand up, so I'll let him speak in a sec.
Go ahead.
This wasn't about any particular functionality. It was more just about so that the cluster install was failing because of an API version mismatch. So just even like it's just that sort of basic, does it switch on sort of test. But yeah, I also appreciate, I know very little about Stack Hub and don't really understand the ins and outs of what even would be a good testing approach. But I'm happy to work with people if that would be helpful. Almika?
Yeah, I think like the difficult thing about Ash and like talking about testing in a community setting kind of goes back to what Bridget was talking about there. You know, it's like this topology is made for a scenario where a customer might, you know, buy it, put it on-prem, and then they use it, right? So it's not like a public cloud offering. So that means if we were going to be testing it in the upstream, you know, someone would have to, you know, have an Ash to donate, you know, for us to use, whether it's the community Ash or some private Ash. But then on top of that, we would have to know what the configuration of that Ash was, because even from one to the next, they're not configured the same way. So like, I love that you brought this question here, because it does go really deep on the testing stuff that we've been talking about for a long time. Unfortunately, I have a feeling, and this is probably my feeling for Red Hat's case, right? Like, if we get to the point where we have a common set of tests that can be run on with any CCM that implements these things, and the cloud provider Azure CCM works on both Azure Public Cloud, AKS, or on all of these things, and works on Ash, right? Then it would probably be on the responsibility of someone like a Red Hat to say, okay, we're supporting a customer who has Ash. We're going to run these tests in our configuration. I think it makes less sense to be doing it in the community at that point, unless we have some really big, you know, interest in having a, you know, like a public Ash instance that we're able to test in the community. Unfortunately, I think that's probably really low priority. That's just like the sad truth of it. So yes, my optimistic view is that in the future there will be tests that we can use to exercise that. Probably a little more pessimistically, I doubt that we would have upstream Ash community tests for quite a while that could do that kind of work. Joel, I'll hand it over to you.
I was just going to respond to Bridget's comment. It looks like I can see the comment you're linking to. It looks like it's AKS are kind of using it as a proxy, that it's not. Whereas we're actually doing testing on Ash, so it looks like they have some Ash testing, but it's not really testing Ash. So I think that's why this got through. Their hack doesn't quite represent what a real world Ash looks like. Surprise, surprise, mocks never quite work as you think they do. I don't think that necessarily changes anything about kind of the ask here of like, please don't break Ash. And I guess the ask is like, how do we not break that? Normally we do it by running E2Es everywhere. I guess to Mike's point, we do rebasing. We have like an automated system that keeps our rebases up to date, probably like once or twice a week. I don't know if we have automated Ash testing on that because we do have limited capacity. We might be able to see if we can get some on there, but it still then relies on the PR having merged and then us noticing it. There's nothing we can do with our ash to prevent like the merge upstream first, as far as I'm aware, which would be the ideal scenario. So it's like, well, what can we do there short of somehow the CNCF having some ash that they can run for Cube 6?
I just have no idea what it costs to get or run those because, again, it's not a thing we run in public cloud. So I don't have any myself.
They are stupid expensive.
I would assume so. Because if you're selling things to people that they desperately want to keep in their own data center, you're going to be setting the price appropriately. I would love to, and I can reach out to people internal to Microsoft who work on Azure Stack Cloud. My question is, if I send them this link, they are going to be going to that comment I linked and saying, this person says everything is fine and they're going to find a workaround. What is the actual request? So I want to make sure I have a clear, what am I asking people for at this point?
I guess in most environments, right, we have different clouds provide credits for you to be able to run E2Es, right?
Okay.
Is there an equivalent for Ash? Like, could Microsoft host an Ash that Cube, SIG's cloud provider Azure could use for E2E? And if possible, like, is there then someone who can set that up and get it integrated and get E2Es running? I don't even know if our E2E suite would pass on Ash, the upstream E2E suite by default. Mike, do you know who downstream has been kind of looking after that? Because I think there's probably been some work involved. Is it Patrick's team?
Yeah, I want to say yes, and maybe I would also reach out to Marco just to see if he had known anything about it from the Splat side too. Sorry, we're leaking out these internal team names.
I don't have information about that. I think these are, if I'm understanding correctly, I'm going to restate what I think I understand. There are two different questions. One question is talk to the people who actually do the technology side Azure Stack Hub stuff and see if they can be more consistent with upstream. But then the other question is there some sort of funding for some sort of donation for something that someone would run in a data center somewhere? That sounds very intractable to my mind because cloud credits are one thing. Saying here's something in a data center somewhere is a very other thing. So
Yeah, I appreciate that. But I guess there's like,
I don't even know how to
maybe
begin to ask for something to go in a data center somewhere.
I do wonder if there is, because obviously Ash, it's Azure-like, but has its limitations, right? It's limited to certain versions of the
Yeah.
API schema. There are certain features that don't work. Perhaps they have some way they can simulate it in a better way
Yeah,
that we can then use.
Absolutely. That would be, I think that would be the approach that I would take is, hey, folks,
Yeah.
how are you testing this? Because y'all don't have something in your basement, I assume. Like, what do you use it? So that is a question I can definitely ask. And
I think in the real world, it's not just Red Hat who support Ash, right? Like there are Microsoft customers out there, so there will be, I assume, other people running Cube on Ash. And if Cloud Provider
absolutely.
Store is breaking for us for Ash, it's breaking for them for Ash too. So like it's a wider community issue. It isn't just us.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think it's a very relevant question. I don't have an easy answer immediately, but I can certainly reach out to the team internally and find out how they're testing. Okay, Amico.
So I wanted to respond to something that Theo had said in chat there. Can we donate our own ash? Kind of facetiously. And although I know you're kind of joking a little bit there, Theo, joking but not joking. This is something I've talked with SIG testing about before, and I'd be, as we start to build this future where we're having these better, testing for CCMs and, a better kind of view about how we do platform testing in general. I am curious to know, like we have right now, we have an ability for, infrastructure providers to be able to have kind of like a credit system where they can, I don't know if it's credits or donations or whatever, how it works, currently, but there's a way for them to donate resources. I would also like to see if there's a way to donate like test results and whatnot, right? Like, because yeah, for this kind of situation where we say, okay, Red Hat is running, this very specific topology, is there some way that we could share those test results back once we've gotten a standardized testing that runs across all the infrastructure providers in like the same way? Is there a way that we can say, okay, here's the, Red Hat's test grid, and maybe there's some like interfaces we can expose where it's like, oh yeah, those can be fed back into the Kubernetes community. This is a topic that's come up before in the past, and I think that would be like, to me, that would be one way to approach this, to try and figure out like how we can get a better signal. Because ultimately, what we want to do is have a good signal back to the cloud provider, Azure or whoever maintainers, to say, hey, this PR you just put up, like it's breaking this thing over here.
Yeah, that sounds cool. Ultimately, like we don't really care where the test runs. We care about the signal, right? Um,
Right. I mean, like in this case, it might be a little weird because we say like, okay, well, then the next question is going to be like, all right, how is that ash configured? Is it did this bug come up because somehow you've misconfigured this topology and everything? But and that's kind of a different layer of question. But I'm hoping that if we got to the point where there was a standardized way to return results, that we would be able to we would have some way to deal with that, where someone would be able to go investigate it or something at that point. But maybe
yeah,
maybe Theo, you and I could sync kind of offline sometime and kind of talk about this, because I think hooking you up with Marco and Milland and whatnot, and kind of getting into that whole testing effort, it might be interesting. And then if we can sync up with some of the Google engineers too, to kind of learn what they're doing and everything, maybe there's a way we can collaborate across, cross boundaries kind of through the community here, to reach
yeah,
the next level of
that
that.
would be really cool. I also think with these ones, there was another one. So there were two that presented in very similar ways. There was a Azure Disk Driver problem as well, where we had almost the exact same scenario, which was we are trying to use an API version that didn't exist in Ash, so cluster install fails. These aren't really hard things to test, and it's not like a configuration mismanaged thing. So if we could just run that sort of thing on a periodic weekly and feed that back somehow, that's cheap and it gives us like a much better response time to upstream than it being 3 to 4 months. Or a customer saying, "Hey, you broke our shit. Sorry." Oh wait, we're on a recorded call. I shouldn't swear. But yeah, that sounds really cool. I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
This isn't meant to be like an ash bassing session either. It's just like
No,
an
no,
interesting side quirk.
no,
Because
yeah,
ultimately,
no,
these are the same components we're using to build Cube. So like all the code is a lot of the same code. Um,
yeah, no, exactly. No, no, no bashing on Ash at all. I mean, it's a fine product. It's just we've run into a software issue here. We're trying to prevent regressions, so people can keep using it. Okay. Does
Attempt to
anybody
get
else?
us
Oh,
answers.
sorry. Go ahead, Bridget.
Oh, I said I'm attempting to get us answers. Do we want them on this merged PR, or is there an issue somewhere? Where would you prefer me to point people?
should we make an issue? I don't know, is the answer.
Well, like Theo, why don't you make an issue about the wider testing topic, like test regressions, and then maybe we can kind of have a wider discussion there with the maintainers.
Cool. Yeah, I'm happy to action item that.
Cool. Thank you. Okay. Does anybody else have questions or comments about the Ash topic? Alrighty. Then with the last 10 minutes or so of this meeting, we'll take some time to look at issues that need triage. And I think there might be a new one in here if I'm remembering. Oh, no, still this batch update, which I don't think we're going to accept, but we're still kind of having a conversation around what's next here. So for those who remember, this user, Leo Lee, has put up kind of an issue about, is there a way that we can make the cloud controllers more efficient by having them batch calls, to the infrastructure providers? And at first we thought this was like batching API calls to Kubernetes, which there currently is not a solution for. The API server just doesn't work that way. But then also, kind of deeper question was, could this be a cloud provider specific thing where, Kirthan kindly brought in that, the AWS provider is already doing this. It batches calls about the nodes it knows to the cloud provider. So, unfortunately, to take this to the next level, we would probably have to invent a new method for the cloud provider that allows batching calls. And then that would have to be utilized within the various cloud controllers. So yeah, like I'm not sure if we want to keep this on the books or continue to evaluate this, or if we are just going to decide that this is not something we want to do. I don't know if folks have feelings now or if they want to leave their thoughts here, but this will probably come up again if we leave it untriaged. Okay, I will give people more time to think about this, and we will come back to it next time. That is the only untriaged thing at the moment that's even new. The other one is our favorite hybrid cloud support, which we were just talking about earlier. So we'll probably have to think about if we want to, this is something we should continue to think about if we even want to accept this, or if the SIG even wants to entertain getting into this, because it is highly complicated. Okay, let us look at, actually, let's just make sure there's no issues that have been posted on the old repo. They're not, this is like, this is the staging repo, so we try to keep this free of issues. And this pull request is part of a discussion we're having, so it won't get merged here, but I'm leaving it open for the discussion at the moment. Okay, so let us look at the periodics to see if we have any issues going on currently in CI. All right, that's good to see. We like to see green across the tests. I'll just take it back a couple of hours or days here just to see. Okay, all right, looking good. If nobody has any other comments or questions, then I guess we can take about 8 minutes of our day back here. Going once? Going twice? Go ahead, Bridget.
Appreciate it. No, great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks everyone for coming out. Great to see a bunch of new faces, and we'll see you next time.